Well, good morning, and thank you for attending the pre-proposal conference for the Human Exploration Research Opportunity, what we call HERO. It's the 80JSC018N0001. This is for Appendices A and B. I am Jennifer Fogarty, the Chief Scientist for the Human Research Program. We have full support from all of our elements to help us work through any questions on the topic. So if we could go to the next slide. So the purpose of the pre-proposal conference is to clarify the solicitation and improve the quality and responsiveness of the proposals in a very timely and efficient manner. We offer the opportunity for NASA to provide potential proposers with information or emphasize existing information that could benefit you if you choose to propose. It also offers the proposers the opportunity to pose questions and receive answers and request clarification. So the entire conference is being recorded. All questions and answers and discussion between NASA and attendees will be accessible to all attendees. The presentation and the questions and answers will be posted on the NSPIRE's website you see below. At times, NASA personnel may engage in a sidebar discussion to determine the best answers, so we may go mute for a couple of minutes while we make sure our answers are concise and appropriate. And some of the questions may be deferred if we need to get more detail to be able to answer them. However, everything that is discussed will be put on that NSPIRE site. And I also want to make it clear that for proposers, both during this pre-proposal conference and afterward, if you were to use email, that your questions and the level of detail with which you write those questions and the answers will be on the NSPIRE's website. At times, we've been contacted with very specific scientific questions relevant to a proposal, and we are obligated when we answer them to level the playing field and provide those on that site that is accessible to anyone who has an NSPIRE's login for this type of proposal. We go to the next slide. So for those of you who might be new to this type of research announcement and the Human Research Program, we wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. The Human Research Program here at NASA focuses on applied research, meaning that we have goals of actually putting this into spaceflight and be an actionable opportunity, something that operationally will make a difference, such as a countermeasure. We really have to temper sometimes our need to know mechanistic or fundamental things. Oftentimes we will rely on a more cause and effect level. So we focus on performing research necessary to understand and reduce spaceflight human health and performance risks, and we'll go into more details in those risks in a moment, to support exploration. We enable development of human spaceflight medical and human performance standards, and those standards are in documents that actually affect vehicle design, and also countermeasures or hardware that would be available to the crew during a mission. Our program develops and validates technologies that serve to characterize and reduce medical risks associated with human spaceflight. So oftentimes, along with scientific research, there comes technology with which to do that research. And on occasion, that technology is actually implementable operationally, and at other times, the development is intentional for a technology to be used to achieve a risk reduction. We go to the next slide. I think it's also helpful to understand from a NASA as an agency, what is our architecture for the future to help maybe clarify what our priorities are. Currently now we're considered in what's called phase 0. This is using ground analogs and the International Space Station in low Earth orbit. Those assets are very valuable with respect to understanding a lot of the stressors that would be involved in exploration. But the plan is actually to move information and science and technology into phase 1 and phase 2, which are around the moon and in deep space, where you would have longer duration exposure simultaneously to microgravity and deep space radiation and increasing stressors along the lines of confinement and isolation. Ultimately, with the goal in a couple of decades to be transiting to Mars and eventually landing on Mars for a variety of different time periods depending on what the mission architecture actually results to be. We go to the next slide. So in order to get our work done in an orderly fashion, we have 5 elements that concentrate on different aspects of the research that HRP funds. So in alphabetical order, we have exploration medical capability, which is really focused on medical care for missions. I think that kind of underplays the broadness of their mandate, which is actually health and performance. We often refer to them at the pointy end of the spear. They are working medical architecture and implement at a vehicle level and have to consider the data and evidence, the countermeasures that are coming out of the other elements that we'll discuss, and how would you implement them across the entire duration of a mission. We have human factors and behavioral performance, has 2 major areas of focus that have a lot of interplay. We have interfaces between humans and vehicle and habitat, definitely focused on the human factor side. And then the individual and interpersonal behavior, looking at things such as team cohesion and behavioral medicine. The human health countermeasures has focused on a broad array of physiological changes, adaptations during spaceflight, predominantly the role of microgravity, but as we'll mention, there's a lot of interplay with the other stressors. So the lines between the elements frequently are blurred when you're going to work on a given risk, although an element may concentrate on a particular area. The next element is more of our logistical support element and implementation arm, the ISS medical projects. Anyone who has a flight study will interact very heavily with ISSMP, as we call it, to get ready for flight, work with them on consenting the crews, developing flight hardware, understanding the limitations of how we get our samples and analytics, and also timing and complements. I mean, how you wrap together several science opportunities and make it doable and reduce the conflict between science. And then we have the space radiation element. It's focused on the radiation exposure and the biological effects. Clearly, thinking about exploration missions, that as one of the more unknown stressors, the galactic cosmic rays, when we send people into deep space for long periods of time, interplays with almost every other risk that the other elements are working on. So there's a large expectation of integration both on the NASA side and on our proposer side, and hopefully that comes across in the topics as we write them. Another element where there's tangential or complementary opportunities, HRP does fund the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, known as TRISH. That was awarded to Baylor College of Medicine. Its director is Dorit Denobile. They do run independent solicitations, independent research announcements, and they're really designed to bring forward very disruptive solutions. They're meant to be a very innovative arm. They're going to take a lot more risk, but definitely worth an area to look at some of their topics. NASA is highly interested in them, but they are more of that fail fast, fail forward, fail often model. So I think they're doing some interesting work that a lot of our proposers might find their work applicable to. Go to the next slide. So when we write our solicitations, and this is, again, an overview, so some of these may be more or less applicable to the topics of Appendices A and B, but clearly we have access to the International Space Station. We talked just a moment ago about our implementing arm ISSMP, helping investigators get their science flown on that asset. There are definitely times when you need to use ground analogs where it's more appropriate to control many of the variables in an operational or a field type opportunity, which is the International Space Station, and concentrate on one of the variables, such as microgravity or an environmental stressor. So we do contracts with other facilities, or actually outright owned facilities. If we go to the bottom left, you're looking at a facility in Germany, in Cologne, owned by the German Aerospace Corp, a DLR, called NVHAB. It is a recently built and a very highly functional facility that has isolation chambers, can do head-down bed rest, can combine the two as a short-arm radius centrifuge. So a variety of work can be done there. To the top right is the NASA Space Radiation Laboratory located in Brookhaven on Long Island. That is where a majority of our radiation work is done, the terrestrial exposures. I think there's a lot of information on the NASA Space Radiation Lab if you'd like to look into that more, and I think that's our main topic, the main source of topics for Appendix A in the solicitation. And then another isolation analog, which is actually located at Johnson Space Center, is called the Human Exploration Research Analog. The focus has definitely been more on the team cohesion, the behavioral medicine aspects of spaceflight. They've started to integrate other studies, such as the physiological stressors that arise or how you would monitor for them. So that is growing in its complexity and utilization on a variety of different areas. We go to the next slide. So as much as, again, you want to make sure there's integration across, you still have to organize your work in kind of doable packets. So we first mentioned the framework of the elements themselves. The elements also have the assigned risks, where they have the primary function of managing those risks and selecting the science to buy them down. So the first thing that is done, and we do have an internal board system where we concur on what these human system risks are and their priority, is you will be seeing in a future chart, I think the very next chart actually, the actual risks that HRP is bookkeeping. You have to determine the relevant risks, and currently it sits at about 34, but they do shift in priority depending on a couple of things. One of them is actually the agency architecture. Another one is the status of how much we know, what the evidence base has accumulated to tell us. But there may still be questions about things that we haven't yet integrated into the exposure. As you know, when you start to talk about risk, there are things you know about them and there are things you don't. The things you don't know about them articulated as gaps, where you're going to need to gain knowledge to get your arms around, well, exactly how would I solve this problem? And this is kind of where the products and how the solicitation works, in that we're writing the topics in a way to express to you what the gaps are and trying to identify research products to fill those gaps. And that aligns with the applied nature of the program. And that's also where we try to articulate the types of research products that we'll need to fill those gaps. And I think at times articulate things that we don't need, maybe things we've already ruled out. Can we go to the next slide? I think this slide, while it's very busy, it helps to articulate a couple of things. First of all, what are the current set of risks that are identified not only by the Human Research Program, but accepted by other stakeholders at NASA, and that's the left column. Also at the top of the left column, our guiding mission at this point is a Mars flyby. That mission does not have a planetary landing other than returning back to Earth. So therefore, that did influence the prioritization of some of the risks that currently don't have large portfolio or investments being made in active research. Across the top, you'll see years. You'll also see some key milestones with respect to exploration capability, which are phrased as Exploration Mission 1, Exploration Mission 2, 3, and that is Orion and the Space Launch System being able to get into orbit and provide an exploration-like capability. There is also a very clear demarcation in FY24, black line that goes vertical through the chart. That's the end of ISS as it's projected today. Our work with respect to using ISS has to be planned appropriately, and so we keep that in mind in terms of when do we have to solicit for work that requires ISS, and how would that be scheduled into the flight, what's called the flight queue. Now, if we look down the risks, they are in priority order using a likelihood by consequence scale that is also part of our board structure, and the evidence base supports the decision on the numeric score you see there. Anything that is a 3 by 4 or higher is going to be in the red, meaning that it is a very dangerous thing with respect to exploration, or we have very large uncertainties about how dangerous it is, and we need to characterize the issue more. So clearly, space radiation with a long-term health implication of cancer is at the top. Space radiation exposure and degenerative processes due to the exposure is next, where you have late central nervous system effects or cardiovascular disease manifesting. We also have space radiation exposure, and there's a new effort afoot called integrated CNS. I think we also call it a slightly different name. But the focus is on changes to the brain that affect performance. Again, if you're going to identify a change that happens at an anatomic or physiological level, that is very interesting. What would be more important would be to show a functional impact of that change, especially if it's relevant to mission performance capabilities that are required. And as we go down the list, we stay red for a while, but as you can see that our varying milestones allow us to shift the likelihood by consequence into different categories. And the use of red, yellow, green is very intentional and very, I think, obvious. Red being stop. You're not ready to go until you figure this out. Yellow meaning caution. You might know some things about it. You might be able to characterize the risk, but you can't fully mitigate it. And green would signal that we are good. We have enough information and capability to have an acceptable risk posture, which may not be zero change. You may still have adaptation occurring, but that it's in a way that it's not leading to imminent pathology or a performance deficit that compromises the mission. So our topics will reflect these types of priorities, and the detail of those topics really elucidate those gaps so that we're clear about what it is we need to know and why. Can we go to the next slide, please? So there are certainly program constraints as well as goals. There are constraints on schedule, crew access, the need for risk mitigation, and the need for risk mitigation are different than those from other government agencies such as NIH and NSF solicitations. We clarify this because it can be a little bit confusing running a research announcement that our questions are not open-ended. They're actually more tailored to result in an answer that, again, can be applied. We realize that simultaneously you can be trying to answer one question and ask 10 more, and that's where our element scientists and the art of managing science come into play about as we open that box up to try to understand it better, we may then become aware of things we didn't anticipate, and that's a matter of trying to figure out, can we still stay on schedule or do we have to take a different strategy to solve the problem? So when it talks about again, more constraints, both ISS and the analogs are limited resources, so often our capability to fly off or put into analog studies takes more years than one may anticipate. It's not uncommon for flight studies to take 8 years to accrue the critical N, which may be 10 or 12 participants. Analogs can definitely work more quickly than flight, but it is still a limited resource, and we usually still work on a small N. The number and demographics of astronauts vary, so it's meant to be a diverse population. We know that diversity increases success in a lot of different ways, but it can be very challenging when doing science, especially NASA has a particular emphasis on sex differences, making sure that we study if there is an effect on females that is different than males, yet we fly much fewer female astronauts at this point. The last several classes have been 50% female, so in the coming years as those astronauts get into the flight queue and become certified for flight, the ability to do both males and females at an equal distribution will be more likely, but that has been a definite constraint. As I mentioned, the agency exploration architecture definitely influences our priorities. We don't want to be fickle, but at times we have no choice to be. So, as I mentioned, when they no longer had a Mars planetary landing, that deprioritized some risks that were really tightly linked to landing on another planetary body without rescue forces available. The focus is really on human system risk reduction, and mature and applied research needs to be balanced against the need for mechanistic and fundamental research. And I think as we opened it and I tried to explain what applied meant, that really captures it. We understand that there is a need to do both, but we are definitely on the side of if you know enough to be able to impact it and understand if it's actionable, we may be satisfied with that rather than digging more deeply into a mechanistic or fundamental element of the problem. Can we go to the next slide? So as I mentioned in constraints, both ISS and analogs can be very constrained with respect to N number. There's also a schedule element to doing statistical considerations given the amount of years that might go into having to complete a study. NASA requires a very robust statistical design. We actually have a statistician on our review panels intentionally to give us a score to indicate that the scientific methodology is aligned with the statistical analysis. I think you can read through these, and also there is some information available about small N studies that have been published to influence the design, and we heavily encourage people to have a collaborator who specializes in statistics for the type of methodology you'll be employing scientifically. Go to the next slide. Just a quick overview of the solicitation process. When the NASA research announcement opens, the first part is to get a step 1 in. These proposals are submitted to NASA and should include a synopsis of the intended research. We require that those step 1 proposals be in by the 5th of September and on the Eastern time of 5 p.m. We review the step 1 proposals for relevancy, and we do give feedback and do invitations for the step 2s. This is twofold. One, we get a lot of feedback, about the amount of time and energy that goes into writing full proposals, and if something is really not going to be relevant and do well with respect to a relevancy score, we want to be very upfront with that. And it's also going to help us prepare, say, peer review panels so that we know what kind of content is coming our way. So when you get invited from a step 1, the next step is to do a step 2 proposal. This is a full proposal, and I realize that the NASA research announcement has lengthy instructions about the requirements. So if you're new to applying to NASA, I suggest both you and your institution become very familiar with those instructions and requirements. The step 2 proposals are due on the 30th of November, again by 5 p.m. Eastern time. When those step 2 proposals arrive, they will be reviewed for both merit and programmatic relevance. So the merit peer review will be conducted by a panel of scientific and technical subject matter experts that are an arm's length away from NASA. And then NASA will evaluate, particularly our HRP, will evaluate the programmatic balance and feasibility and cost of what the proposals are providing. So, and final decisions will be announced for these particular appendices in April of 2019. Go to the next slide. So for this pre-proposal conference, again, we're focusing on Appendix A flagship, which has the risk of synergistic effects of radiation, stress, and altered gravity on spaceflight behavioral health and performance, which will be a virtual NASA Specialized Center of Research, a VN score. The second topic is space radiobiology tissue sharing. So this is looking for research proposing the use of archived tissue samples or samples from ongoing experiments, and we can explain more about how you achieve that. And then the third topic is impact of dose rate on space radiation health risks. These are considered flagship topics, and each topic will have both a budget and a number of years associated with it that are specific for those topics. So be very careful to make sure if you're applying to one of those topics, you know the budget that has been assigned for that topic. Appendix B, the omnibus. These are much more open-ended. These are not specific risk targeted. The only time we run the omnibus opportunity is during the July solicitation. We will run other solicitations at 2 other times during the year, but this is the only time you'll see omnibus. These are short-term investigations or technology development projects that provide innovative approaches to any of the risks and associated knowledge gaps contained in the integrated research plan. There is, via the HRP website, and I believe it is the Human Risk Roadmap portal, Research Roadmap, you can get to the integrated research plan to see exactly what kinds of risks and gaps are in the entire portfolio. That green, yellow, red chart gave you an idea of all of the risks, but the integrated research plan goes into much more detail. We have increased the budget this year, so it is for 1 year, $150K. And the second aspect to the omnibus are the basic investigation opportunities for investigators new to NASA. If you have not received HRP funding before, you may be eligible for this, and there are slightly different bounds to that. So it is still a 1 year, $150K award. And there are some options for a second year for what we call a BINI, the Basic Investigation Opportunity. Go to the next slide. So we are now in the backup. So I think we've completed the main part of the presentation for today. We are going to open up a question answer via the chat only. And we will do our best to keep up to the questions as they come in. But if you'd like to start to interact through the chat room, we'd be glad to answer any of your questions. So the first question that's of technical, is there a format for the Step 1 and Step 2 proposals? Yes, there very much is a format. It's in the directions for the research announcement. So in particular, you should read the directions for the appendix, the topic, and which should either be in the flagship or the omnibus, and there will be specific directions for the format to be used. Second one, can investigators submit proposals that respond to Appendix A and B simultaneously? Yeah, so yes, if they are duplicates, we will reduce it to 1. Is the next omnibus Appendix B opportunity in next July, or do we have one coming up in 2018? So currently there is Appendix B open, and the Step 1 should be submitted by September 5th. So the 2018 omnibus opportunity is open right now. I have a brash proposal pending with Trish. Remember, where should I submit the same proposal for HERO? It depends on our topic and how appropriate. Trish and HRP are looking for different things. So again, it's your judgment as to whether it is responsive to our topics. It says, is there a new investigator program on Appendix B, a different application than the other? Yeah, so not actually a different process. There is a box to check to identify yourself as a new investigator. So you'll be given slightly different consideration for the award type, but you would be judged via peer review and relevancy review the same way as the others. Is there any priority given at V&L for animals? This is only a 1-year proposal. So that is part of the feasibility. Yeah, it's a part of the, if you're suggesting using animals but only have a 1-year, I would say, omnibus you're looking at, part of that would be to determine if it was feasible or not. If you're looking at doing radiation work, there are actually topics in the flagship you might want to consider that would be more appropriate. Sounds like the focus of this call is on radiation. Will you be considering proposals that help fill other gaps too? Does some element need to involve radiation? So right now, the topics as they are stated is what you need to be responsive to. Other risks and gaps will appear in future solicitations. We run another flagship topic in November and March, which would cover different territory. It was just these were the ones from an Appendix A standpoint ready to be solicited for at this time. Is it possible to get the PowerPoint for this presentation? Yes. So the PowerPoint slides will be available online through that same link on the NSPIRE site. When will the awards start funding? So with selection in April, it's usually a couple-month process. So it could be July. It's about a late summer for the actual award money to start flowing. For Omnibus, are there requirements on the innovation readiness, example, TRL at the start and then the period of performance? No. The omnibus are very open in general, so we could consider anything across the entire spectrum of TRL or CRL. Can systematic review research proposals be submitted? We would give you feedback during the step 1 process if it were responsive to the call. I think there are times under the omnibus that it may be appropriate depending on what you're suggesting. Can the same PI submit 2 different proposals to Appendix B? Yes, as long as they're not duplicative. Will there be a flagship for SANS risk down the line? SANS is a high priority risk. I would think it likely that a future solicitation might have something in there for SANS. It's just not in this flagship. Are the 3 analogs shown in the slide the only analogs available for funding proposals, or would review consider other analog candidates such as Antarctic or other locales that might be optimal fits for the given research studies? So in general, you should write your proposal with the analog that best fits your work. And if you are selected, there might be a discussion about an analog that we have access to that is equally appropriate. We do actually have a relationship with the National Science Foundation and can implement things in Antarctica. It is not easy. It is as difficult as the other types of analogs, but you definitely should write it for what's appropriate for what you're trying to achieve scientifically. What can you tell us about the check marks next to the tasks listed under the gaps for each list in the roadmap website? In those tables, it also lists funding status. Should we propose research for the gaps that are not funded yet versus those that are? Yeah, sorry for the pause. We wanted to make sure we could give you a good answer. So in that resource that you're looking at, the check marks indicated completed work. So we suggest that you would look at the areas that were not completed to propose work that would fill essentially an open gap. We don't have work that's fulfilled that. This is both Brash and Hero asking for behavioral health innovation. Are the program managers for this domain coordinating? Yes, we do coordinate. I think you should look very closely at what we're trying to achieve. So they are, the Brash and Hero solicitations are not duplicative from our perspective. Are there any special requirements or suggestions for revising and resubmitting a previous proposal? I don't think there are special requirements, but I think the expectation is if you received feedback, say, from peer review, that you addressed any weaknesses, because we do have access to the prior peer review. If one is proposing radio protection studies that require Brookhaven National Lab treatment, will such studies be prioritized given the one-year duration of this award? So I think you need to look at what is flagship versus, and where that may be responsive versus that may not be the best strategy for Omnibus, since it isn't only a one-year award. I think you have to think of Omnibus as scope your work properly so that it could be accomplished in a year. If your work can't be accomplished in a year, it's not appropriate for Omnibus. And also, it would have to be aligned with the budget, which is only $150K. Is the new investigator program on Appendix B also the same deadline as of September 5th? Yes, it is. Can you tell us more about the $1.6 million budget cap? Does each submission get one award, even if we have multiple sub-teams? estimates for the VN score. I'll ask Dr. Williams to.
So we're going to pick up at the question regarding the $1.6 million budget cap. We're assuming that that's referring to topic 1, the synergistic risk, and there's expected to be 2 awards. Each award would have a budget cap of $1.6 million.
The next question is drug PK/PD considered high priority at the moment? The chart showed it as TBD, knowledge lacking. Currently, that risk is in reformulation. It is still a gap with respect to knowledge. I would say it is not the highest priority, but we do have our element scientists from Exploration Medical Capability.
XMC is looking at future work that relates to PK/PD. So if an investigator had an omnibus proposal that was really promising, it may assist us with our future work. So I would say that you should go ahead and submit something in that area if you feel that you have a good idea.
Would you please clarify where we can see Appendix A and B? If you're on the NSPIRES, logged into NSPIRES, and you're at the HERO solicitation, the appendices would be just under that. So it gives you the main directions for all NASA research announcements, and then Appendix A and B will be listed to give you the specific instructions for those two opportunities. For the Step 1 proposals, to what extent should it include emphasis from a statistical collaborator for the sample size issue, or is Step 1 just relevancy of topic and the sample size issue something that is recommended to be generally addressed but specifically emphasized in Step 2? So in Step 1, I think it is more of a relevancy of topic. It is the Step 2s where there is a section to include for statistical analysis, and that's where the emphasis was and where peer review will occur. So Step 1, the focus is definitely on relevancy of topic. If you are resubmitting a proposal that incorporates changes based on the feedback received on the prior proposal, should you indicate how you made these revisions? I think I just lost it a little bit. Sorry. moving screen. Should you indicate how you made these revisions in the narrative for the new proposal? I think the extent to which...
But there's actually a section.
There's a section where we request exactly how you address the changes that you made from the previous proposal, and that's in the Step 2.
Concerning the omnibus and new investigator opportunities, should we focus on the risks that are marked in red? Would other risks be funded as well? So omnibus is not hinged on the priority of the risk necessarily. I think you can gather that in terms of emphasis on issues NASA HRP has to solve, that the red risks are definitely more urgent. But other things would be considered on the merit of what the proposal would produce. Can you tell us a little more about the new investigator program? I could not tell if it was different from the Appendix A, B, or the same. So it's actually a designation that you choose a box to check. It just allows some more latitude, particularly on the Appendix B with the omnibus, that you could be considered for a second year, which is not available to the straight-up omnibus Appendix A, or Appendix B, I apologize. So it's not a completely different program from what you're looking at with respect to Appendix A and B. It seems the flagship focus on countermeasures. Is there any interest in detection of radiation or monitoring of human health as a result of radiation effects? Example, muscle mass, brain activity. I think that's a matter of how you develop your proposal to address the need. There are areas where definitely monitoring, identifying relevant biomarkers and actionable changes that then we could know we either had to change something or provide a countermeasure are just as useful as a countermeasure itself. Are we allowed to contact program manager to discuss our proposal ideas? We do provide the names and contact information for our element scientists who are responsible for the topics. I think they can engage on some more detailed conversations about the topic itself. But again, communication at that level would, if it resulted in information, would be published on the NSPIRE site in order to level the playing field. So then we have the sound issue. Can there be other investigator co-eyes on a proposal submitted under the new investigator program? Yes. You can see questions. So there's the sound. Were there any previous Appendix A researchers in the field of SANS? So Appendix A is just nomenclature that when we start the year in July with our New Year's HERO solicitation, follow-on appendices will occur throughout the rest of the year. Again, we will have solicitation topics in November, and in March of 2019, they will have different appendices assigned to them that are appropriate. And at that time, you may see things such as SANS show up as a priority topic. It just does not appear to be in Appendix A at this time. Last year, we ran several solicitations that were looking at a variety of different aspects of SANS. So high priority risks may appear in future solicitations. Can we add more collaborators to the proposal if invited to a Step 2? Yes, we have had modifications to collaborators between Step 1 and Step 2. To what extent is pilot data necessary for each Step 1 and Step 2 proposal success? We conferred for accuracy, and the emphasis on having your pilot data presented is really at the step 2 level, where peer review will be assessing that against, again, your hypothesis and how you think your methodology is going to address the hypothesis. Topic 1 does definitely focus on relevancy of topic, but if you do have supporting pilot data, I would encourage you to include it. You have an estimate of the number of awards for Appendix A, tissue sharing, and dose rate topics. Yeah. We have Lisa Simonson, element scientist for space radiation, online.
2 to 3 tissue sharing topics and probably 1 dose rate topic, perhaps 2.
Thank you. Are applications on radiation expected to focus on animal models at this stage, assuming one can model the impact of radiation on the brain? Would a study directly investigating the impact of non-invasive countermeasures in humans be appropriate? Comment?
I'll take the first shot and then let Lisa come in on it. If you're talking about developing a computational model based on biomarkers and dose rate effects of radiation treatments, that could potentially contribute to the second component of the topic 1. And I'll let Lisa address it if I missed the mark on what was intended.
I have no additional comments. That sounds correct, Tom.
Maybe, Ben. So we are answering that the charts are moving. Hang on. There's a follow-up on the other investigator question, that can these other investigators be individuals who have previously received funding from NASA? And yes, the other investigators can, but clearly the PI has to be the one who was not previously funded by NASA. In the announcement, I thought I read that NASA doesn't award separate indirect funds to institutions. If our institutions require it, is the idea then that we should build those costs into the initial budget de facto, or is it that we simply tell our institution that the funds don't apply to indirects? No, actually indirects have to be accounted for, and I believe it's in the budget sheet. That the total award is the number you see, and that if indirects are required by it includes both. Can we contact Dr. Adam Rusick and Dr. Peter guide us for radiation-related proposals? Yes, their contact information is provided in the appendix for that reason. Can we have the URL to the HRP integrated path to risk reduction? Okay, that will be posted on the NSIRE site. Next question, can we download the PowerPoint used? Yes. So NSIRES will be posting the charts that were used today. They will be available for you to study afterwards.
question is, you could sum up in 3 sentences the ideal outcome of the flagship. I'll take topic 1. Topic 1 is really attempting to help us look at the integrated risk that would come about as a result of someone that's in a stressed environment, altered gravity environment, and then irradiated. What would the sort of cascading effects be? Would they be synergistic effects that would accumulate and make it worse than it would have been if any one of those risks were realized? Or would it just be additive? And then we want to be able to use a computational model using past research that's been done with single ions, because this topic will include a mixed field GCR simulation. So is there a synergistic effect when you get multiple ions coming in as opposed to the single ion effects? Building on past research should help us understand how that comes together in a synergistic way.
Lisa, you want to summarize the other 2?
Yes, so for the tissue share topic, we're really focused on looking at the validity of our permissible exposure limits and informing those limits. And so we are looking at threshold doses, relative biological effectiveness with comparative the high LET radiation to gamma radiations. And we're also interested in tissue sharing to support the translation to humans, and looking at our existing data sets that we have, other data sets, including larger species, to enhance that translation to humans. So that's the tissue share topic. And then the dose rate topic, what we're really trying to understand is the difference between an acute exposure and the chronic exposure found in space. And so we specifically asked for data that helps us inform our knowledge in that area to determine a dose and dose rate effectiveness factor that is consistent with our modeling capabilities in order to estimate risk. And then that's why it has a modeling component, and it also has the look in the topic to support translation to humans if we can relate any of those dose rate animal studies to human epidemiology.
Thank you. Next question. If submitting a basic investigation opportunity, should the proposal include a pathway or a hook for a possible second year, or should one specifically not do that? I think if you are coming in as a basic new investigator knowing that that's an option, that you might want to consider a strategy where you identify a possible follow-on, but that you really confine the work to the 1 year and the 1 year budget of $150K. Is there a pre-proposal meeting before all step 1 submissions? So we do have pre-proposal conferences after we open each of our Appendices solicitations. So there'll be another pre-proposal conference in November and another one in March. And those will specifically address the topics being solicited at that time. Next question is, do we need a letter of support from LSDA for tissue-related proposal? No, you do not need a letter of support. You just need to identify the types of tissue you would require. Next question, when is the next HERO deadline is anticipated? So the next deadline is the 5th of September when your step 1 would be due. Again, it was 5 p.m. Eastern, no later.
Jen, may I make a clarification on the tissue-related one?
Yes, Lisa, please.
But if you are getting tissue from another PI's institution, then you need a letter of collaboration from the other PI's institution if it is rodent tissue samples, for example. And then what those arrangements are, because that lets us know that the investigator has the tissues and that they're willing to share them and they're fixed in the ways that you need them for your analyses.
Great, thank you for the clarification. Well, thank you very much for attending this pre-proposal conference. We appreciated your time. We hope we were able to answer your questions sufficiently. If we have not, again, you can contact us, and I do want to remind you that all the questions and answers will be posted on the NSPIRE site. Ben Goodman is listing the links to both the HERO, the flagship, the omnibus. We will provide a link to the Human Research Program Integrated Research Plan and the path to risk reduction. I understand some of those, the writing was small. And thank you. I'm glad you appreciated the information we were able to provide today. Again, next due date is 5th of September at 5 p.m. Eastern for any step 1s for both the flagship and the omnibus. All right, have a good day.